Cruise ship workers overdid it. What was the biggest oh crap moment on the boat that luckily passengers didn't find out about at all? Fires. I worked on a cruise ship for 2.5 years and we had 3 major fires. They were all in crew areas and were controlled and extinguished by our awesome fire team. The passengers never knew what happened, only that their waiter had to leave in the middle of dinner service. People don't realize how much training the crew members go through to handle these situations, and they will never know that their waiter just helped save the whole goddamn ship. I know at least Carnival makes their employees pay for internet. I was talking with some crew and they were asking about current events and politics because they are almost cut off because of how expensive the internet access is. They do. It is cheaper than what the guests pay, but it's also super slow and they charge by the minute. This is why if you ever go on a cruise you'll see whatever coffee shop is closest to the dock full of crew members on their laptops. I currently work for a cruise line on shore. I have assisted people who want to bury their loved ones at sea. Obviously, the bodies have to have been cremated and the ashes have to be in a biodegradable container. My buddy worked in the theater on a cruise ship and always had fun stories from traveling around. Cool thing. Beers are less than $1 in the crew bar. Bad thing. You always have to be sober enough to operate a lifeboat and man your station during an emergency. Crew members getting left in countries because they were off getting drunk and chasing cute locals. Old people dying and being put in a freezer on a low deck near one of their storage areas. Good times. A new guy miscalculated the pool treatment and one of the jacuzzis ended up with a pH less than 2. It was discovered before the area opened and that one remained netted for the rest of the day while it was balanced. A wiper painter stood on a small cupronickel black water pipe to reach higher on the bulkhead. Literal oh crap moment. From the floor to his knees. If you're pushing 140 revs on the shaft and the ship still won't break 15 knots, check the bulbous bow for whales. A pipe burst and flooded the kitchens. It was a waste pipe so we had to throw everything out and get a sanitation company to meet us at our next port and go out and buy all new inventory. We gave out vouchers for food but if we had been further from port that would have been awful. I went on a cruise once. There was an infestation of lice and I got off at the first port and flew home. Carnival fully reimbursed me. We were on a family cruise and after a wonderful dinner we were trying to get back to our room. As we got to our floor and headed down the hallway there was a new dead end. A wall had appeared that separated us from our room. We were told we had to go the opposite way and go around another hall on the other side of the boat. As we walked we noticed many new walls. Once we got to the other side the floor was wet and one of the new walls was leaking water from behind it. It took us 20 minutes to navigate the newly built out labyrinth. We were so worried we were taking on water we could barely sleep that night. I was a passenger and was shooting the crap with one of the crew members late at night. He told me that on an earlier cruise someone had died in a hot tub the first night out of port and people didn't know for hours. He managed to stay propped up and his sunglasses helped hide it. Several passengers entered the hot tub during the time and assumed he was antisocial for whatever reason. The crew discovered him when they were closing the pool area for the night. They moved the body downstairs to the morgue. None of the passengers except the guy's family found out about it. I'm working on a cruise ship currently. One time we had to turn around to take someone to a hospital, and then there was a fire in the laundry room, and it was also pretty rocky seas. Also people die on cruise ships, and the bodies are kept in a special freezer. I mean, you gotta do something with the body if you're at sea. Testicles. That is all. Not a crewman, nor am I a bosun, but I went on one of those overnight cruises to Bruges and we caught one of the seamen with his pants literally around his ankles as he was balls deep in one of the waitresses. We scheduled the heckaroo out of there and later found that it was actually a couple who were on the cruise as passengers and were role-playing, and that we had actually barged into their cabin by accident while drunk. Talk about a plot twist. One of the waiters had to go to the back room really bad but it was during the dinner rush so the supervisor told him to wait. He ended up running out of the restaurant and crapping his pants on the way out and left a trail behind him. Also, not really an oh crap moment but the amount of workers who get pregnant is pretty crazy. So much freaking goes on between the crew, it's crazy. My in-laws went on a cruise and someone killed themselves by jumping off the dang ship in an empty area. They found out like hours later and had to go back looking for him. Never found the body. Everyone knew though. I worked on one and heard that it happens kinda often. Sometimes they plan it way out in advance and it's their whole plan go out with a bang, a cruise, and then end it by jumping overboard. Usually happens at the end of a cruise, because they still want to get their money's worth. No, the house band doesn't care if you are the second coming of Eric Clapton. We aren't going to invite you on stage to hear your version of C. Just relax and enjoy yourself. Yes, we sometimes have bad nights. Playing 3-4 hour sets, 5 nights a week for months on end does leave some room for us to not be on our A game sometimes. Just relax and enjoy the show. Welp, looks like we need to cut the set short tonight, kids. The drummer just had a heart attack. Be sure to tip the waitress. The DJ will be right up to keep the music going. My dad worked on a cruise liner in the 80s. When it was in the Falklands as a troop carrier, it was nearly sunk by a French Exocet missile fired by the Argentinians. I believe it was closer than 100 meters before it was destroyed. Another time one of the engineers discovered a fire in the engine room, and so as not to cause too much of a panic by sounding the alarm, he ran around the middeck shouting "Fii" in the main engine room and then ran back downstairs. Finally, another fire was once discovered by a boiler technician who, whilst not on duty and drunk, put it out with his makeshift male firefighting equipment. I'm so glad the boiler tech was well prepared. I was IT officer on board, now senior. On my, I think, third contract or so, we had a complete meltdown of our data center. Everything stopped working. PMS hotel management system, POS, point of sales, of course all the file shares, email etc. It took us 3 days, and a lot of luck. And I am talking really a big chunk of luck to get everything up and running again. Our front of the house staff handled the situation amazingly. Everyone who usually relies on emails from external came afterwards to thank us for the downtime and asked if we couldn't do that more often. Sure, our guests didn't notice a thing that basically the whole operation needed for the hotel side of our ship was affected and every system was down. This didn't affect any bridge or engine equipment, as it is completely separated from our environment that we in IT are handling. Only one I have witnessed were 2 fires in the engine rooms. Scary thought, because of the nature of the ship's normal workers are picked to be firefighter trained. So your onboard firefighters will be engineers or wait staff or galley men. They chose the big bulky ones who won't be blown over when the water comes out the hose. Hubs and I went on the Oriana to the top of Norway for our honeymoon this February-March. Thoroughly recommended. But when we were in Alta, so 70 degrees north, it was -15 during the day and got down to -27 both nights we were there. Pretty cold. In fact, so cold that the poor old girl had her pipes freeze. The electrics go out. They were cooking lunch in the dark using guys with torches. Captain Gray even said later that he checked Oriana's logs and she'd never endured colder than -10 in Alta before then. Then worse as we were heading back south and hit the North Atlantic current, which was -6 and so melted all those frozen pipes. Some flights of stairs and a little mini buffet were closed because of water damage, and they did say on disembarkation, if you're a plumber, please stay. My housemate's sister works for Carnival and mentioned to me they'd had an emergency meeting about Oriana's predicament. Currently working on a ship sailing out of NYC. Just a few months ago we had a passenger go through a breakup with his girlfriend over the phone while on board. He went to his mother's cabin, told her goodbye, and before anyone could do anything about it he ran up to deck 15 and jumped about 150 feet into the water. The rescue boats searched for hours and never recovered the body. Everyone assumed he got sucked under the ship and into the propulsion system. Protocol is not to tell other passengers more than they need to know in the event of an emergency, so we all had to keep quiet. Also on decks TT-1 through 2 there are a bunch of watertight doors that divide up the different compartments that have several tons of force behind them when closing. They will stop at pretty much nothing when set to close. We once had a contracted mechanic on board doing some temporary work and he dropped a tool on the wrong side of a closing watertight door. He reached back to grab it and his arm proceeded to get stuck and the door closed on his shoulder. Totally sliced off his arm and he bled out and died before someone found him. I don't work on a cruise ship but on a ro-ro ship that can take a few passengers. We got complaints one day of the toilets in one of the passenger cabins not flushing. After the engineers spent hours flushing out the sewage system to get into the right pipes, turned out the only couple on board had been dumping all their condoms down the toilet, which had clogged the whole system. I work as a contractor on cruise ships and jump between ships all throughout the year. I've done 18 cruises in the last year, and being a contractor I get a lot of interaction with guests and crew. The crew is trained in virtually every possible situation you can imagine and have required drills every week. There is quite a bit of death on board and there is a morgue on most ships I work on. A lot of suicides that nobody catches until someone reports them missing and you hear they jumped in the middle of the night. In fact, I've been on board when they had more deaths than they had room for, so they threw a surprise ice cream party for the crew so they could make room in a separate freezer. But what actually was the craziest experience for me on board was when we lost satellite the night of the last election, and when everyone woke up we got it back and the results were just in. I've never seen a more divided ship amongst guests. Arguments, parties, fistfights. It was 8 AM. where we were at the time, and it's definitely a weird way to start a day at sea. We also had a guest get stuck on a mountain in Alaska and we had to call in air support before we could leave to get them back. And my favorite story to tell is when I was saying the Red Sea, we had armed security on board and they just stood and watched the water in case of pirates. We had required lights out and curtains closed after 6 PM for our own protection, and it was always fun to see a tiny army ready to fight pirates at any given moment. Those dudes could drink. Worked on a ship where the centralizer pod up and died due to contaminated lubricating oil. A friend on the engineering staff said that from the time they noticed the temperature change to complete fuba was less than 10 seconds. Did the company replace it? No. Divers stripped the blades off the prop next turnaround day and they left it that way for the next 6 months. Driddick is expensive. Yawl ran the other 2 props at 110% and shortened our port stays to compensate for the reduced speed. Never mind what would have happened if we'd lost another one in the middle of a storm. Brand new ship, too. Used to leak through the front shell gates when we crossed the Bay of Biscay. I'm sure the guests wouldn't have been happy to see 3 inches of water sloshing back and forth on the luggage deck every cruise. I've worked on cruise ships English and American for 13 years and I have some great stories and some pretty sad stories. The one I'm about to tell didn't happen to me though. It happened to a friend who is still a cruise director to this day. I'll call him CD. CD was strolling along a guest corridor when he came across an old man sitting outside his cabin on the floor. When he asked the gentleman if everything was okay, the man just looked up and shook his head. CD asks what the problem was and the old gentleman said, "My wife's in bed. I think she's passed away." CD calls security and they enter the room to find his elderly wife had in fact passed and couldn't be resuscitated. She was pronounced and all the wheels are put into motion to take the body off the following day, and he would be helped with all the arrangements to help get him and his wife's body back home. The man told staff that he would like to stay for the rest of the cruise and it's what his wife would have wanted. The company allowed for the body to remain in the unbowed morgue until they arrived back at the home port a few days later. Apparently the guy won bingo, attended the captain's cocktail in formal dress and was seen to be really enjoying the remainder on the cruise. I work on a passenger ferry. We found some guns being smuggled into the country. Had to keep that quiet. Kind of hard to do with police dogs on board. Red parties is not a party you weren't invited to. It means fire. Blue parties is still not a party. It's a flood. And the call for Mr. Mob. They're not calling for a man whose surname is Mob. They're calling out that there has been a man overboard. Mob. Enjoy your cruise with your newfound knowledge. One of our spa attendants lost it. I mean seriously lost it. He had worked for the ship for years and was slowly building a kill list of employees that he was planning to kill. He was slowly sending himself a gun in pieces so that it wasn't caught by ship security in incoming packages, and was nearly done when his roommate found the list. I was on a Disney cruise last year, transatlantic, and one night there was a special code that came blaring into our room, whatever Disney's secret fire code is. Too lazy to look it up, they never came back on to tell guests what it was about. People above me thought the ship was sinking. I heard them run for their life vests. Closet doors slamming. I peek out into the hallway, dazed and confused passengers. I got online to look up the code and learned it was a fire code. To make a long story short, there was a fire in one of the restaurants. I'm going to assume that they had to call the code into the staterooms because, you know, there was a freaking fire on the ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. If they come on and say fire, people will panic and there would be mass chaos. But the fact that they never bothered to follow up on the code tells me in the case of a real emergency, we dead. I still love to cruise. 10/10 will do it again. This story proves why updates to the passengers are so important. The ship I am on will broadcast the status of the fire every 10 minutes or so if needed. The captain will assure the guests with the process made. Imagination is almost always way worse than information. I once was working loading a cruise ship and a man with a warrant once jumped off the side of the ship into the Hudson River, swam to the West Side Highway and hailed a cab just to avoid getting arrested. Police were waiting for him to come through customs. I worked on a cruise ship in Hawaii. One time we ran out of rice and the Filipino employees refused to work until we got more. We made an emergency port on Oahu and got more. I don't think anyone noticed except for the kitchen crew. I was one of those events no one found out about. I went on a cruise when I was really sick BC. I thought I was dying and wanted one last hurrah with my husband. I ended up becoming paralyzed during a meal on the ship. The waiter was so discreet and they had a whole protocol to deal with it. I don't think any diners around even caught on. Everyone I interacted with remained calm and very polite. The shipboard doctor was surprisingly good. Made me realize with how many old and sick people that cruise there are lots of medical emergencies of all types probably on many cruises. And they are completely equipped and prepared to deal with a lot of them efficiently and discreetly. On another cruise, one of the excursions was a private plane scenic tour. It was popular. One of the planes crashed and it took a while to learn that it was carrying passengers from another ship that was in port. Really put a damper on the rest of the cruise for everyone. Though, that one wasn't kept a secret. Getting the call at 2 AM to prepare the lifeboats because there was a fire in the engine room. From what I could find out, the ship was 7 minutes from calling a evacuation because of this situation. Much beer was had the next day. A teenage girl and her 10-ish-year-old brother had a serious argument on an open deck at night. She was much bigger than him. She picked him up by his throat and held him over the side of the ship. We were doing a Baltic run and between some ports with serious distance between them. So the ship was sailing around 26 kts and it was pitch black. Security happened upon them while this was happening and, thank God, prevented an either intentional or accidental Oscar man overboard. The girl was kept in the brig until morning, and the family was disembarked and repatriated immediately. It was actual crap. Stranded on the ocean with our sewage system backed up. Never go on a cruise. Oh yeah, the passengers did find out about that one. Had a crew member jump overboard. January 2012. Monarch of the Seas. Not sure how much the guests knew, but we all heard Oscar 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 starboard side and knew it wasn't a drill. Poor bloke. My 6-month contract went uneventful for the most part. While we were crossing the Atlantic, leaving the Mediterranean and heading for the Caribbean, an older passenger got deathly ill. So much so that we had to detour and hand him off near Bermudas. Obviously his family and friends knew, but the detour went unnoticed by the rest of the passengers. Also, the casino manager got crap-faced in Venice, missed the ship, and caught up in Santorini. He somehow managed to board before the ship set sail. I worked on a cruise ship in guest services and we would deal with a lot of crazy people. One of the craziest things to happen was when we found immigrants from Cuba floating on a life raft in the middle of the ocean. We had to bring them all on board and keep them in crew area until the Coast Guard came to get them. We basically told guests they would be off the ship by morning, but people were freaking out. The Coast Guard came in the middle of the night and then they were gone. Also, GI breakouts are really bad on ships. Wash your hands, people. I worked on ships for 3 years and boy, the stories you hear about or live through, this one takes the cake. Though, my colleague in the kids center who we all found creepy AF is now a convicted diddler serving 14 years. The ship always needs a certain number of crew members on board, so when it's your week cruise to be a designated crew member, your passport and it are confiscated so you literally cannot leave the ship. This was from a crew member I connected with on Grindr and had a drink with on his night off. I didn't see it posted in the thread, so I decided to share. I was on cruise about 12 years ago as a passenger and we were off the coast of Mexico leaving a port. I do not remember which one. All of a sudden the ship started shaking really bad. Things started falling off shelves and it was really scary. We thought we hit a reef or something. The next day the captain announced over the PA that we had gone over the epicenter of a 8 magnitude earthquake. The port, we found out later, had been basically destroyed. No big oh crap moment during my time working aboard, but I do recall them having a dive team periodically go down under the ship to check for explosive devices, and guests just thought, oh look dear, they have divers. My first week on the ship, a crew member committed suicide. The captain announced over the ship PA that there was an unexpected death of a crew member, but didn't mention the circumstances. The guests knew someone had died and that the crew was taking over the theater for a memorial, but not how he died. The guests were more upset that it disrupted their vacation. Didn't actually work on the cruise ship, but went on a cruise when I was in college for a class trip. We could only afford cabins way down in the bowels of the ship, next to the crew quarters. A lot of them were college age kids too, so we got along well. Was up on the top deck one day catching some sun, and over the speakers we calmly hear code 10. Top deck, code 10. We looked around and didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Went back to relaxing. That night we were talking to some of the college crew and they said that some older lady slipped getting out of a hot tub, tumbled over the side of it and smacked her head, killing her. The crew was on it super quick and basically none of the passengers knew about it beside their immediate family. They really keep things hush hush on those things. Former cruise ship employee. I was 19 and put in charge of a section in case of emergency evacuations. It was supposed to be my job to direct people to lifeboats. Yeah, I never went to my post. I was an AV guy. I had no training for emergency situations at the time. I wandered around an empty ship during drills before departure. Yeah, so if there was an emergency, better hope you weren't in my lazy butt 19-year-old section or you were fricked. This was 10 years ago. I've since developed a more professional work ethic. Almost the same. Also an AV guy, but about age 26. Managed to get an exemption because I had to film the passengers during the lifeboat drill because it was absolutely the best way to film as many of them at once. And people bought the videos if they were in the preview of them. So my motivations were much more profit oriented than laziness. Used to work for Princess. During one cruise, we had 4 passengers die from flu. The ship was considering going into quarantine at sea, but luckily, we didn't. One time in Chivy, the gateway to Rome, there was a crew excursion to Rome. It was supposed to be all day and get back right before all aboard. Someone committed suicide on the train tracks, so it held back that whole group. 10 minutes before all aboard, hundreds of crew members burst out of the Chivy train station and ran toward the ship. It was like something out of 28 Days Later. They mobbed up the gangway. People were throwing their CPASs forward to have them scanned before the deadline. Very little leniency for being late. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.